Now that users can register a new account via Firebase Authentication in our WPF application, I want to add the ability for users to log in. So just like last time, we're going to start off by building the UI. So we're going to build a login form, and we're going to have a view for that. So let's create a new view. Let's add a new item in our views folder. And of course, it's going to be a user control. That's what we use for pages in WPF, and we will call this the login view. So this is going to be a little bit similar to the register view. So we'll reference that as we build this out. So first off, come over to the register view. I also want the login view to have max width 500 and a margin all around of 25. So let's move that over here, just copying and pasting. Maybe down the road, we'll extract this max width and margin into a reusable style if we need to. But continuing on, just like the register view, our login view is going to have 2 rows. So one is going to be for the header, and that's going to be the same as the register header. So let's copy that over to just a text block for the header with a larger font size of 32. And this is going to say login instead of register. And then similar to the register view, we're going to have a form underneath of the header. So that's going to be in a grid. Let's just copy over this grid and its row definitions. So underneath our header, we have our grid for the form. Let me make sure I close out this grid. And for the login form, we are going to have less rows. So for a user to log in, they're going to have to provide their email and password. So we are going to have a row for email, then a row for password, and then a row containing the button to actually submit the login form and execute the login. And then another button at the very bottom that'll say something like, don't have an account yet, then click here to go to the register view, something like that. So we're only going to need 4 rows here, unlike the register view. So let's remove these last 2, and let's populate these rows. So the first row is going to be the user's email that they use to authenticate, and we actually get that email in the register view. So we already have this form field on the register view, so we can actually just copy that and move it over to the login view. So just a stack panel containing an email label and a text box to enter the email. This binds to an email property, which we'll eventually implement on our login view model that we'll create in a little bit. But other than email, a user is also going to have to provide their password. So on the register form, we have a password field. So we can do the same thing, move this over to the login view, just copying and pasting that in here. Let's import our bindable password box from last time. So this is just a custom component that allows us to bind to the password that the user types in, which is something that's actually not possible on the default WPF password box. So this custom component is essential here. And same kind of thing as the email field, just a stack panel that contains a label and input. But for this stack panel, for the password, we actually want this in grid row 1, not 2. After that, in the next row, we'll have a button to actually submit the login form. So again, we can just grab our button from the register form, which is this submit button right here. So let's just copy that, paste that into the login view. This time we're going in grid row 2. And the content can stay the same of just submit. And then finally, in our last row, we're just kind of a button that'll take the user to the register form. So we have a similar thing on the register view, where we provide a button to take the user to the login form. So we're basically just going to do the opposite on the login view. Let's copy this button and paste that into the login view. Put that in grid row 3, the final row. Instead of binding to a navigate login command, we're going to bind to a navigate register command. So that command will navigate the user to the register form. And then the content here can be need an account, question mark, register. And we did copy over this button style to make the button transparent. So I think what I'm going to do is extract this to a reusable style because it is a little bit complex, or at least in the future it could become more complex. So in our app.xaml, let's add a style here targeting buttons, and we want to extend the default button style, which we actually have defined right here. So we can do based on static resource and specify our button type. So this will allow us to inherit off the default button style. And then we can just move over those setters for the style we have defined in our form. So let's just cut those out actually. and paste those into our reusable style. And now we don't want this style to be the default style because we don't want all of our buttons to be transparent with no border. So let's give this a key, and we'll just call it button transparent, because that's effectively what this style does, is it makes the button transparent. So let's reference this style in our forms. So getting rid of this inline style, and let's set the style to reference our button transparent. So we can reference that static resource and pass in the key for our style, which IntelliSense actually picks up. So let's do that and do the same thing for the register view. Get rid of this inline style and use our reusable style. All right, pretty confident with the login view we have right now, especially since we pulled a lot of pieces from the register view. So that being said, let's just jump straight into creating the login view model, which is what this login view will bind to in order to get data and execute commands. So in our view models folder, let's add a new item here. This will be a class for the login view model. Let's inherit from view model base as all view models should, so that we get iNotify property changed. And now let's expose properties that the login view needs. So we need an email property, so we can generate that with our helpful prop change snippet. I have a link for that in the description, but let's generate this. And it's just a property that raises on property changed in the setter. So this property is going to be the email property. So there we go. The next property we need is the password. So let's do the same thing. Let's have a prop change property for that. Just a string again for password. There we go. And then finally, we need to provide a submit command. So let's just expose an I command. That's the type that WPF uses for commands. This is called the submit command. That's what our view references. And we can just make this read only and initialize it in the constructor. And then we need another command, and this one's for the navigate register command. So this command will navigate the user to the register form and allow them to register. All right, now that we have the basics of the login view and login view model, let's go ahead and wire up the login view to the login view model and also display the login view when our application starts. And then once we have all that set up, we'll get into implementing these commands. So we're going to get into some navigation stuff here, and I'm not going to go too in depth with the navigation setup we have here. Instead, I'd recommend checking out the part of the series where we implemented the register form, because in that part I went more in depth with the navigation infrastructure that we have here. And I also have various other resources across my channel where I talk about navigation, so be sure to check those out if you have any questions. So let's get into this. First, I want to wire up my login view and login view model. So that's done in my main window. So whenever the current view model for our application is a login view model, I want to map that to a login view. So similar to what we're doing for the register view model and register view, we're going to have a data template for the login view model. So whenever the current view model is a login view model, we're going to map that to a login view. So that should take care of the mapping. Now we just need this current view model to be a login view model, so we display the login view. And that's done via navigation. So we set that up in our app.xamarin.cs, and we're going to use a navigation service for a login view model that will ultimately change the current view model for the application and display the login view. So we're going to add this navigation service as a singleton. So this is a navigation service for a login view model, and we'll register this with a callback that provides our service provider, and this callback will create the navigation service that we want to register. The navigation service needs our navigation store, which is where we store the current view model for the application, so it needs that so that it can change the current view model. And then we need to provide this navigation service with a delegate type or a callback that'll create our login view model. So that'll just be a function that'll take no parameters and return our login view model. And our login view model takes no parameters, and that should be everything we need. Let's add the parentheses that we need, and there we go. We've registered our navigation service for the login view model. So that means we can now navigate to the login view, and let's do that when our application starts. So instead of resolving the navigation service for the register view model, let's resolve the navigation service for the login view model and navigate to that view when our application starts. So when we run this, we should see the login view. Let's see. And there we go. We get our login view. Looks good. So now that our view and view model are hooked up, let's get into implementing functionality. So with that, we're going to implement this submit command, which is actually going to execute the login. So let's create that command over in our commands folder. Let's add a new item. This will be the login command. Let's create that. We're going to asynchronously hit Firebase to execute the login. So let's extend async command base here. So import that from mvvmessentials.commands, and let's implement that abstract class. And now all we have to do is implement this execute async method to actually execute the login via Firebase. So let's make that method async. And similar to what we did for the register command, where we execute the registration for the new user, we're going to need two things. So the first thing we're going to need is the data that the user put into the UI. And that data is conveniently stored in our login view model. So we have our email and password properties that contain the data that the user typed into the UI. So let's get the login view model as a field in our login command so that we can grab the credentials that the user typed in. So the login view model. And then once we have that data, we're going to have to execute the login through Firebase Authentication. So for that, we're going to use our Firebase Auth provider that interfaces with Firebase Authentication and is part of the Firebase Authentication.net package. And this Firebase Auth provider, Facade, provides us with a method to sign in with email and password async, which is what we want to use. So let's get that as a field in our login command, the Firebase Auth provider, importing that from Firebase Auth. And that should be everything we need. Let's go ahead and generate a constructor to get those dependencies passed in. And now that we have everything we need, let's simply execute our login. So let's take our Firebase Auth provider and sign in with email and password async using the email that the user typed into the login form, which is on our login view model, as well as the password. And of course, this sign-in could fail, whether it's a network failure or a Firebase failure, or I think it'll even fail if the user's email and password is incorrect. So let's surround this with a try catch. And if it failed, we'll just show an error message box. So we'll do a message box dot show, and we'll say login failed. Please check your information or try again later. The title for the message box can just be error. We'll just show an OK button, not really any options with this message box, and we'll show an error image. But then we'll also show a message box if the login was successful. We'll just say successfully logged in. The title can be success, and the image can be information. So now let's use this command in our login view model. So we can set this up in the constructor. We'll set the submit command to a new login command, and that'll require a login view model, which is just this instance, as well as our Firebase Auth provider. So let's get the Firebase Auth provider through the login view model constructor. Let's generate that parameter, which means we'll have to update our login view model initialization to pass in the Firebase Auth provider. So up in our app.xaml.cs, let's do that. We can just resolve our Firebase Auth provider from dependency injection and pass that in to the login view model. So we should be good to go. Let's try this out. I did register already when we created our register form. So let me log in with those credentials. My email was test@gmail.com. And let me type in my password. I believe it was test123! And let's log in. All right, so here we go. We are executing our login command. We got our data from the UI, which was passed to our view model. So let's execute this login, and it was successful. So I guess I got the credentials right. That's good. And we get successfully logged in. So let me make my credentials wrong. Let me just type in the wrong password, and I think I'll get the error. Let's continue. And there we go. We get login failed. So maybe we should handle this exception better, even though there are sometimes benefits to being ambiguous when it comes to authentication. But I think in this case, for the sake of user experience, it would probably be better to at least distinguish between invalid credentials or some kind of network outage. But at least for now, I'm satisfied with what we have, and I'm pretty sure for the register command we're doing the same thing. So yeah, In the future, we're going to come back and revisit handling these exceptions better and providing more appropriate error messages depending on the exception. So now that we have the core functionality of our register and login forms, let's hook both of those forms together and allow the user to navigate between them. So for that, I want to initialize the navigate register command on the login view model, as well as the navigate login command on the register view model. And then finally, after the user registers, I want to navigate to the login form so that they can log in with their new account. So those are the three things I want to do. Let's start off with the login view model and initializing this navigate register command. So let's initialize that. And for this, I'm just going to use a helper command from the MVVM Essentials package that will navigate via a navigation service. So this is called a navigate command imported from MVVM Essentials. And all that does is take a navigation service and navigate using that navigation service whenever the command is executed. So in this case, we want some kind of register navigation service, and we can just get that passed through the constructor. So let's add a parameter for that. And now when we initialize the login view model, let's pass in this navigation service. So that's in the app.xaml.cs. So another parameter we need here is going to be our register navigation service. And we've actually already registered that in dependency injection up here. So we can just resolve it. So let's take our service provider and resolve the navigation service for the register view model. And that's all we need to do. So now if I run this and then click that button at the bottom, we should navigate to our register view. So let's click this. And there we go, on the register view now. So that's exciting. I always like seeing navigation working. So now let's get into navigating from the register view to the login view. So same kind of thing. Let's start with this navigate login command. So let's initialize that. That's going to be a navigate command from our MVVM Essentials package like we just did. Again, just takes a navigation service that it uses to navigate. We'll pass in some kind of login navigation service because we want to navigate to the login page. So let's get that passed through the constructor, and we can pass this in up in our app.xaml.cs like we just did for the login view model. So add another parameter here. Gonna pass in a navigation service again. Let's pass that in, except this time it's for the login view model. So let's make sure that this works. So we should be able to navigate back and forth between these two views. Here we go, need an account, register, and already have an account, login. There we go. So now the last thing I want to do is navigate to the login form after the user submits registration successfully. So that'll take place in the register command. So this command is going to need some kind of navigation service. So let's get our navigation service up here. And this navigation service should navigate to the login view. So this will be a login navigation service. And let me just regenerate this constructor. I feel like that's easy to do. There we go. And now after the registration is successful, we can just take our login navigation service and navigate. And that'll navigate us to whatever view the navigation service wants to navigate to. So we want to navigate to the login view. So when we initialize this command, let's pass in our login navigation service, which we conveniently already pass in to the register view model because we use it for this navigate login command down here. So now after we register, we should navigate to the login view. So let's go ahead and register. I'll put in some information, and here we go. Let's submit here, and successfully registered, and we navigate to login. So now I can log in with that new user I just created. I think these are the right credentials. Let me try this out and submit, and there we go, successfully logged in. So now we're just left on the login page, and probably next time we'll implement the next page of our application and navigate to that page after login. So users can now register and log in our application and can navigate between the registration and login forms. So this time we were more focused on the login form. Let's summarize what we did. So we created our login view with just a login header and the form fields, one for email, one for password, and then a button to submit the login and actually execute the login against Firebase Authentication. And then finally a button to navigate to the register form if the user needs an account and needs to register. And then we created a view model that our login view could bind to. So this allows us to get the user's credentials that they type in, and also provides commands to our buttons on the UI. So when the user clicks the submit button, we execute our new login command, and that grabs the user's credentials from the login view model and executes the login using the Firebase Auth provider that interfaces against Firebase Authentication. So that was the main login functionality that we implemented, but then we also implemented the navigate login commands on our register view model so that we can navigate to the login view from the register view. And then inversely, we kind of did the same thing on the login view model. So we implemented the navigate register command to navigate to the register form from the login form. So hopefully you can apply these concepts in your own application to log users in via Firebase Authentication. But if you have any questions, criticisms, or concerns, be sure to leave those below in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video or are enjoying the channel, consider becoming a member. Other than that, leave a like or subscribe for more. Thank you.